All right, welcome to a new recent release roundup. Some housekeeping real quick. I'm trying to make my cat stop yelling for attention. He vocalizes for attention, it's a lot, which means he's probably gonna yell on and off throughout this video, and I'm not allowed to tell him to shut up or respond to it in any way. So we're just gonna go with it. We're just going with it, and this video is a little late. There was a heat wave, and these videos take a lot of work, and during a heat wave, I just wanted to exist. Or attempt to exist. Actually, I didn't want to exist. I wanted to go run away to a very cold place, and I couldn't. But we're here now. I have 12 books to talk to you about, and if you're new to these, I basically go into the internet, I look for reviews of books that I find interesting that were released the previous month, and down below I have the playlist of recent versions of this video. I have a Goodreads shelf where you can go look at these books yourself for more synopses-based information, because I won't be discussing synopses in this video. I will be talking more about what people did or didn't take away from these books, the vibes, the tropes, the stuff that did and didn't work, that sort of stuff, and I will have all of the content creators linked down below and timestamps next to the books as I talk about them. Really check out all these creators. They put in so much work. They read the books. They make standalone reviews that the YouTube algorithm does not push and that people do not click on. So you really should check them out. And a lot of these people review books month to month, and it makes these videos easy to make. And also you can just tell that they really love the modern version of the genres they read in. This month we have literary fiction, we have sci-fi, we have horror, we have YA, we have middle grade, we have a wide range of things that I'm really excited about, and unfortunately, there's a lot of disappointments. So there were a lot of spicy reviews that I got to watch this month because some of the anticipated releases people had on their radar did not deliver. And so with that, we're going to get into it. I go from things with the most ratings on Goodreads to the least, back and forth. I pinball between those two, so we go from most popular and buzzy to maybe hidden gems, things that don't get as much love. Starting with a book that almost I didn't talk about because it's literary fiction and I didn't know so many people were talking about it, and that's Lapvona. So I have never wanted to read another book by this author because I read Eileen, okay? So full disclosure, I'm not the reader for this book, and that was only confirmed to me as I watched all of the reviews. My friend Evie from She Was Only Evie actually made a review to make sure that I talked about this book in this recent release roundup. So this shows you have powers. If you make review videos for books, chances are I might talk about them here. But she wasn't the only one who talked about it that I know. Whimsy Dearest also talked about this, and Overly Average Ben talked about this, both in wrap-ups. So there were people I knew talking about this book. And Whimsy Dearest actually had the most, lukewarm reception, not really a strong opinion one way or the other. This book's actually quite controversial in terms of people thinking it's too grotesque, too depraved. There's just too much shock value to people actually thinking it's maybe not their favorite thing, but was an artistic choice. There's a whole range of opinions for that. And some people who did some really good reviews, Eric Anderson, Sean from Travel Through Stories, and then Willow at Books and Bow, which I think was my favorite review. It was really funny. I really enjoyed that review, so highly recommend it. But the general takeaway is that it's grotesque, it's depraved. This is a farce, filthy medieval fable. And it's a look into feudalism and our current, relationship to capitalism through this medieval allegory. There are no characters to root for. They're all horrible people. There are disgusting things happening on page. And almost everyone who liked this book or didn't know what to rate it, didn't know their relationship with this book was I could not look away. It was what was it said? Guilty voyeuristic feelings. And so whether or not you think that things are done for shock value or needed to be this grotesque, I'm not surprised. I read Eileen, and I don't think Eileen's as dark as this, but I was uncomfortable, and I think that was the point. So I didn't like reading Eileen, but I understood the point of Eileen, and so I never wanted to read another book by that author again, because I'm you're too good at making me uncomfortable. And it seems like she has excelled. This seems to be the most uncomfortable read in existence. I don't know much about the plot. It is creating a lot of literary discourse, though, and I think if that was the goal of this book, is to make people talk about it and have different opinions and, form the discourse that is going back and forth on the bookish internet, it's accomplished its job. So I'm still not going to read this book, but I'm glad I got to watch a lot of reviews for it because it was really interesting seeing what people did and didn't take away from it. I will also say, in terms of writing style, people said the prose was very accessible and it's not dense, which I know is sometimes a turnoff for literary fiction. And that thematically, it's a little on the nose. So if you don't like on the nose themes, this might also not work for you because it's just going to be, I think, really on the nose. What little I did here is well, yes. And someone even brought up, this is baby's first socialism book. They really didn't know what socialism was. This can really spell it out for you, sort of thing. So just know that. And next up, though, is one that doesn't have any ratings, and it makes me sad, and I only could find one review, although it's a stellar review, and you should definitely check it out, and that's The Ballad of Perilous Graves. So Injiri has a part 1 and part 2 review for this. I highly recommend you check it out because she put into words what I really couldn't. And I'm the only other person that really kind of sort of has a review for this. I have a New Orleans blog where I went on a trip to New Orleans and I read this book. And I had a fun time, but I could tell that this book wasn't really for me and what I do for escapist reading. It was actually way more of like a cultural study of New Orleans, and I thought it was done in a very authentic and genuine way. But Injiri describes it so well. She described it as jazz music, where you have these different plot lines and there are these different rhythms and sounds. And when you listen to jazz music, you don't always understand why the instruments are combining the way that they are and where you're going. It's not your traditional rock song, right? You don't know where you're going. There are rules, there is structure, but it's not traditional. It'll meander, it'll go places. And that's how this book felt, which is very fitting because it's about New Orleans. So I would recommend this to people who either love New Orleans, have a strong connection to it, or love learning about cultures and people and places like this. I think this is a really great way to learn about the soul of New Orleans. I truly think, having read it while I was there, having, listened to Injiri's review, the author is from New Orleans, or at least has lived there for a long time. It is a love letter to that city and the culture and what people value there. It has a trans main character. It has children coming of age characters. It is such a unique blend of a lot of stuff that you're familiar with, but are done in a way that is very unfamiliar. And it's also very, I would say it's fantasy, but it's like fantasy, magical realism, sci-fi. It's the definition of speculative fiction in that. Try to put it in a box. It's going to be way too hard. So really, go watch Injiri's review. She's way more eloquent than me most of the time, and I really loved re-experiencing the book through her reviews and her takeaways from the themes that resonated with her. So they were just stellar. Also, the book is an amazing production. I've seen it at the bookstore, and I really want to buy it. I don't have room, and I don't think I loved it enough, but the map in the book is so cool of NOLA. It's so cool. And yeah, it's a book that I'm really glad I read, even though I know it wasn't entertainment-wise my favorite thing. So next one is the first of the many disappointing reads that we're going to discuss in this video, and that is Mended by Alix Harrow, the sequel to A Spindled Splintered, which I recently read last month. I talk about it in the video where I read all the novellas that are nominated for the Hugo, and I really liked A Spindled Splintered. And then I only heard disappointed to bad reviews about Mended. So, Bright and Bookish was probably the most positive, but they didn't really love A Spindled Splintered. So they thought this was a slight improvement, but didn't really like either. Thought they were very just run-of-the-mill fairy tale retellings. Bethany at Beautifully Bookish Bethany actually really liked A Spindled Splinter and did not like Mended. Similarly with Abby Salter, she was also disappointed. And the general consensus, I heard this almost verbatim in all of their reviews, was, what was the point? Or, interesting idea, but I didn't like the execution. And why did we need this story? It really didn't progress the character anywhere, is a big complaint people had, which I would find really annoying, because I don't think the main character was the reason I liked A Spindled Splintered. So if I was just stuck with her and nothing's really happening, yeah, that would be annoying. So I'm probably not going to read this. It's just a bummer, because I actually kind of liked A Spindled Splintered, that was a enjoyable good time. But up next is one that I was really excited that reviews were finally coming out for, because it was on my radar, and this is the middle grade. And this is Onyeka and the Academy of the Sun. This cover is stunning. This is the story of a young girl who has this relationship with her hair. It's very large, it's unruly. It causes her, I think, a lot of anxiety based off the reviews I've seen, and she discovers she has magical powers related to her hair, so she gets to go to a magic school. And this magic school, Ashley at Bookish Realms, I'll have her recent reads where she talks about this, related it to X-Men, which, yes, superheroes, X-Men, and apparently there's a lot of other cool superhero powers. Just really excites me. Miss WOC Reader also had a wrap-up, I think it's a wrap-up and not a standalone review, where they talk about it. And I also found a short video of someone discussing how much they enjoyed it and how much they needed the sequel. So all those will be linked down below. But I think this might be a middle grade that I need to prioritize, primarily because I have been craving stories where people, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people have interesting relationships with their hair. I don't think that's abnormal for people to have a love-hate relationship with their hair and how it works and how to make it conform to beauty standards, etc. I actually do have a hair anxiety disorder, and so I've always wanted a story with a character with a complicated relationship with her hair, but the hair is actually, a good thing. It's a superpower or something. And so this is actually my thing is I wanted one where the hair is a character, because I always joke that my hair and I, we have to talk a lot, you know, two different entities sharing the same space. So for me, there's just a lot of things here that I've always been craving, and I do think that if middle grade me had had a story like this, I might have not have had such a rough time growing up, because I had a rough time. Having curly hair was not it in 2005, let me tell you. That was not the move. So really excited about that one. Next up is one that people were disappointed in, though, and it also has the, like, orphan children with magical powers trope, and that is Ordinary Monsters. So here I have reviews from Kristen, Rachel, Ian, and Sins. I'll have those all linked down below. Kristen is pretty negative on it. Ian is a more, like, tempered 3.5, 3-star, and then I think Sins and Rachel's were the most positive in the 3.5 to 4-star solid, like, this is an interesting start to a series range. I did not find any glowing, this is a new favorite of all time reviews. And in general, I think a lot of people were expecting more vibes, darker tone, and that really wasn't delivered here. And the cover, I think a lot of people were like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I just don't think that is what was delivered with this book. And a lot of people who had a rough time with it just felt like it was long, it meandered, there was no hook, there was no character depth. And there maybe was some interesting world building, but it wasn't executed the way that they wanted. But a positive thing was that the prose were accessible, but another potential negative, this is more based off the reader, is that there's a lot of pulp culture references. So this is definitely a book that's probably a miss for me. Like, I already wasn't interested in it just based off the cover, and I think covers sometimes are actually good at marketing to people, despite the number of times I read a book after avoiding it for years because of the cover. So this one, I think, is a long first book in a series that I'm probably going to pass on. But I do recommend looking at the range of reviews down below, especially Ian's. Ian's was a very well-tempered, this is what was good for me, this is what was bad for me review that I actually really enjoyed watching. Next up, we have Daughter of Ren Winter, and Rachel from Shades of Orange, again, giving us a review and a wrap-up. If you follow me and don't follow her, you really need to change that, because she is always posting out recent release reviews for sci-fi, fantasy, horror, thrillers. Really check out her channel. But we have Alan, Leanna, Bethany DNF'd it, and I have a review from Nico. So, we got a range. We have a range from DNF to 4 stars, I think. I think Alan gave it 4 stars. Maybe he gave it 4.5 stars. I'm unsure. But Alan definitely liked it the best. There's a discussion video between Alan and Leanna. Leanna gave it 1 star. I have her wrap-up down below. And so, essentially, what I gathered from Leanna is that this is the author of Blackwing, and she loves that series, so does Alan, and this is actually the book he wrote before Blackwing, but that the publishers were like, yeah, let's see if we can revamp it and put it out there. And for that reason, it doesn't feel very original, unlike Blackwing, which all I've heard about that book is how cool the world building is. And this is kind of more of a vanilla, I've seen it before, fantasy, and it has really inconsistent pacing, and I think character connection is a big problem with this based off a lot of reviews that I saw that were more negative. Alan actually really appreciated the teenage themes of finding identity. He thought that was really relatable. He sees it a lot in the students that he teaches. I think other people found the position this character was placed in uninteresting. She's at a magical school, and she has to keep her ghost-talking powers a secret. And she doesn't get to partake in that magic school setting, which would frustrate me to no end. And also, the world building is executed primarily through conversations, which I think is going to be hit or miss for some people. I don't think I would mind that if the world building was interesting enough. But a lot of this feels like a fantasy book that if you like a lot of the tropes that are brought to the table, you might have a fun time. But if you're looking for something unique or original or a character with a bit more agency, at least at the start of the book she doesn't have it, I think maybe near the end that pivots, this might not scratch an itch for you. Unsure. This next one I'm actually also very excited for. It's really interesting. The ones that I'm most excited for this month are actually not in like my standard like age range, because this is a young adult horror, and that is Hell Followed With Us. I have a lot of great reviews for this one. We got Ashley from The Bookish Realm, we have Jen Insight, we have Gabby Books and Other Nerd Things, and Audrey at Perpetual Pages, which, again, if you somehow follow me and don't follow Audrey at Perpetual Pages, what are you doing? Audrey is way better at selling books than I am. Literally, Audrey is probably the one who sold this book to me. Them and Ashley, because Ashley not only had it in a recent reads I'll have linked down below, but had it in their top 22 books of 2022, and I'm just like, yeah, I think I need this book in my life. Now, I want to emphasize, this is horror. It has body horror, and with horror, it comes with content warnings. I will leave that to you to go look into them. Ashley does mention a bunch of them in their video. I'm sure there's a whole list on Storygraph. Protect yourself. I'm really interested because I do actually kind of like disturbing, fast-paced horror things sometimes. I do enjoy that, and this seems like a really fun dystopian YA horror. I think the premise of this is there was like a biological warfare that turned people into monsters to fight things. I don't know. It was something done by an extreme religious group, okay? And we're in a dystopian future, you know. So far away. So far. And our main character is a trans character who is taking back their agency by becoming the monster to fight the people that were trying to turn them into the monster. And the way Audrey described it, it was a very cathartic situation. And a lot of reviews I also saw from Gen Insight describe this as a very diversely queer story. Lots of great found family elements. And a lot of really well-developed characters. Like, maybe not every side character was super well-developed, but especially the main cast were really well put together. So this seems really cool, really well, fast-paced. And so I think if you are good with the content warnings that come with it and know that it's horror, you should check this out. This seems like it's a really good release this year. And I think it's a debut. And yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. And this covers everything. This next one's also a dystopian, or anti-dystopian. That's The City Inside. I've read this, and Rachel from Shades of Orange has read this, and I couldn't find other reviews because this is also one of those criminally underrated books of the year, but I also get it because it's not for everyone. It's kind of sort of a literary sci-fi, but I don't really know if it'll work for all literary readers, and it won't work for all sci-fi readers, and I don't really know where it should go. Like, in my head, it's like, if you like 1984, I think you might like this, or if you liked The Memory Police, I think you might like this. Because it's one of those dystopian books that is more thematically based. It's more introspective. It's more following the minutiae and the mundanity of these characters' lives in this near future anti-dystopian landscape. And our main characters are privileged individuals who do not like this new status quo of the government over-monitoring people in India, but they're not in danger. They're actually well off. There's no real impulse to push them into resistance, into rebellion. And you're mainly just following these people in their lives as they are basically people who produce influencer vlogs, essentially. They basically are, the people behind the influencer. And you kind of watch as they go through their daily lives what pushes them into resisting. And there's a light part at the end about resisting, but it's primarily about getting to resistance, not resisting itself, and also just the world building of looking at this place. And the reason I think of it as literary is it's really a really deep character study into these two individuals. And I really like Joey. So, and like things that Rachel brought up is that she also really appreciated the world building and how near future it is and how it feels like those classic dystopian sci-fi books and things like that. Like, it does not feel like a fast-paced YA dystopian. So if you want it to be that, that's not what this is going to be for you. And I can understand when people say that they don't really like it. Like, I get that. Like, actually, I forgot to watch it for this, but I know Jess Owens has it talked about in a wrap-up, and I think she gave it, 2 stars. So I'm going to link hers down below as well, so you can see a more negative review, because Rachel and I gave it about the same rating. Next up is a book that I'm very, very, very excited to get to this fall, and that is Juniper and Thorn. This is a dark fairy tale horror book, and I am excited because I have been craving this. I almost picked it up this summer, but I was like, no, this needs the leaves to be changing colors. Not always a seasonal mood reader, but for this one, that's what I want. I do think it's going to have heavy themes for the patriarchy. We're going to be looking into trauma, generational trauma, lots of things you should look into before you get into this book, and especially if you're someone who's like, I am burnt out on the patriarchy, this might not be the thing for you, because a lot of reviews I saw said that this really got their blood boiling. Whimsy Dearest had a review for this. Samantha Green Eggs and Sam has a review for this, but they gave it 2 stars, so to balance out some of the positive reviews, you can look at that one if you want. And then Ari Moon, I posted a video review of theirs for, I think it was The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. It might have been a different YA book. But regardless, I really like this review style where there's just really pleasant imagery in the background and some light music, and it's all text review. And they're really well thought out reviews, and they're only 5 or 7 minutes, and I just really enjoy them. I don't know. It was very pleasant consuming a review in that way. So if you want a calming experience of standalone reviews, I think it's a really nice blend of YouTube and blogging, I think. It's something that's very unique, and I really enjoy it. And so this takes place in the same world as the previous book by this author, The Wolf and the Woodsman, but it's in an industrial era, near future, and this family who usually relies on people coming to them for their magical wares is now struggling because of the industrial era, and that kind of leads to family issues. Like I said, there's probably some trauma going on here. I think there's abuse happening. I do think people who had maybe less stellar reviews had issues rooting for these characters or understanding why these characters were doing the things that they were doing in the story. So I'm curious to see where I will fall on that when I read this book. And there is some body horror, but like I said, that's why I'm calling it dark fairy tale horror. So just be aware of that. I'm really interested in it. And yeah, I'm curious. I want to read it. I cannot wait till the fall. Next up, though, is a book that is probably brought to you by Deshauna. Probably. That's the Finale Strife. Oh my goodness. So many reviews. I've got Sam's review, I got Deshauna, I have Roger, I have Stephanie and Ingrid. And Roger and Ingrid read this because of Deshauna. For all I know, Stephanie read this because of Deshauna. Deshauna loves this book. I obviously have her gushing review down below. Stephanie's review is also gushing. Ingrid only has her thoughts in a wrap-up for now, but with a review to come. And Roger has a very good, broken down review into his normal parts where he talks about, general thoughts, world building, plots, characters. He always has such well thought out reviews. They're really great to watch. But in general, this is a resistance fantasy, which is why I have not picked it up, because I've been burnt out on that lately. I think I'm just a jaded individual who needs to have a little bit more hope in my soul, because every time I read one, I'm like, you'll never win. You'll never win. I'm just so jaded right now. But there's a caste system. It's based off blood. So this is actually in a very LGBTQ friendly world. This isn't a world with racism or, ethnicity, prejudice, and things like that. There's prejudice. It's just based off your blood. It's still based off something you cannot control. So it's definitely a fight against this caste system. I don't actually remember what our main character is supposed to be doing. That somehow slipped my mind, even though I've watched so many videos of this review. I do know she has a very privileged friend, and that this is kind of sort of a multi-POV story. And there's a third POV that might get more character development in later books, is something people were mentioning. I also heard rumors that maybe there's a magical competition in this book, but it's not a big part of it. And that this is Sapphic and Northern African and Arabian inspired story. So I'm very interested in it. The people who love this book, it's the favorite of the year for them, would give it 6 stars if they could. That is such a ringing endorsement. No other book in June has gotten this much love by the people who love it, if that makes sense. So it's on my radar. Hopefully it's on yours. If you need more specific thoughts, like maybe what the main character is doing in this story, check out the other reviews or the Goodreads list. Our second to last one is Locklands by Robert Jackson Bennett. I have a review for this. Judith has a review for this. Petrick listed it as its top 5 book of 2022 so far, which, yes. And Fun Fantasy Books has a really fun series review for this as well. I thought she did a great job of hyping this series up. It truly was a really great production of review. She's actually been doing a lot of really solid reviews. I know I've mentioned her in previous recent release roundups, but the energy she brings to the table, unmatched. Judith does a good job of also explaining the things that maybe aren't done as well in the third book versus the first book. And Jessie May, who had a recent reads recently, also mentions that the found family aspects that a lot of people grow to love in the first 2 books are not as present in the third book. This third book takes place 8 years after Shorefall, which is a choice. Shorefall ends at a very, very precarious point. And a lot of us, I think, were expecting to have near future consequences from those events, and being 8 years removed, it's oh, so you guys have already dealt with the messy stuff. We're looking at this from afar. And I think it's actually a really interesting choice, and I don't hate it, but that mileage is very much going to vary from person to person. Also, one of our main characters isn't as much of a main character. We have a different person that takes more of a front seat. So I think this book kind of falls into a similar pattern to the Mistborn trilogy, if you've read it, where even that series, the found family of the first 2 books, is so strong, and then the third one is still a great book, but it's more plot-focused because the stakes are so astronomically high, we have to focus on saving the day, okay? And that's kind of what happens here. But Judith also brings up a good point in her review that these are still heist stories. Every book is generally a heist. We have tools, we have a team. How are we going to solve the problem in front of us and break it into smaller parts and get it done? So if that's something you like in your stories, you have to check this series out. Also, if you want a reaction vlog, I have one linked down below. It is spoiler-free, but if you're super spoiler-sensitive, I would say it's not completely spoiler-free. But it's pretty spoiler-free. There's not major moments are revealed, but if you're super spoiler-sensitive, or you read in between the lines really well, maybe wait till after you've read the book. So, yeah. Next up is a book I didn't know was coming out, and was actually really surprised at the mixed responses based off how loved this author is, and that is In the Shadow of Lightning by Brian McClennan, the author of the Pattern Mage trilogy, Z? I think there's 2 trilogies for that, and novellas and stuff. I don't know. I've never actually been interested in any of this author's works, and I guess I'm now less interested because of the reviews I've seen for this one. So we've got Nico's books review, we have Rachel from Shades of Orange, we have Bethany doesn't have a video out yet. I'm sure it'll be in her wrap-up because it was reviewed on like July 31st on her Goodreads, but I read her Goodreads. And I have Fantology, I have Treebeard book reviews, which actually that was my favorite review because he was so disappointed in how much he didn't like it, but he wasn't like angry about it. He wasn't bashing the book. He was just like, man, that was such a good prologue, and that's where it peaked. I'm like, oh, that sucks. It really sucks. I think this is a story of a man who was like the best of the best, man on high, you know, like everything was going right, and in the prologue suddenly everything crumbles to pieces and we get to follow him from there. I think there's actually 3 other perspectives, and a lot of people had issues connecting with all of the perspectives in this book. A thing I heard mentioned in several reviews is that this felt like a debut novel, which is really weird when you think of how many novels this author has written, and I don't think this is the same thing as the Ed McDonald, where this is like a first draft of an old book that's just being brought forward. I don't think so. I haven't looked into it, but I don't think so. The magic system's a hard magic system. This is something that Rachel from Shades of Orange really liked. This is actually a thing that I think a lot of other reviewers didn't like as much. It didn't meet their expectations. They wanted more explanation, or they wanted it to be cooler. A lot of people also compared it to the Mistborn magic system, but it has to work with glass, and I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. Like, I don't really care one way or another, but a lot of people compared it to the Mistborn magic system. I have now learned that he's a student of Brandon Sanderson. That's apparently been brought up many times. Like I said, didn't know this. I've not actually really been interested in reading this author's works for no other reason than I think the Powdered Maid trilogy is a type of fantasy that doesn't usually draw me. And I'm forgetting the name, and if Alan ever watches this video, he's going to be really mad at me. But I'm just going to hope he doesn't make it to minute 27 of this video, or whatever minute we're at when I edit this thing. Oh, what's it called? It's the one where you have guns and fantasy, and I'm completely blanking on that subgenre. I'm really bad at subgenres to begin with. But that was the main reason, and now listening to this review is the lack of character connection people were getting, the fact that it's not to the last 20% that he sets up the kind of trajectory for the rest of the series and a reason for you to care is like a thing, because I think Bethany in her review was saying it felt bloated. It felt like it didn't need to be almost 600 pages. The middle was a lot, but that the end brought it through. A lot of people did like the action scenes. Rachel in her review was like, this is not anything I haven't seen before, but she actually was engaged pretty much the entire time. And what was interesting is I watched her review first. And she's actually usually, I think, a very tempered reviewer. Like, when she gives something 4 or 5 stars, I really listen. Because she's read a lot, and like I said, she can be very picky about what she gives high praise to. So she gave this like 3.5 or 4 stars, and like generally didn't have too many complaints in the video portion. I was like, oh, okay. And then I see a lot of people giving this like a 2-star, I should have DNF'd it, I only gave it 3 stars because the audiobook narrator, like, it was a lot. So the positive review I do have, though, is Fantology. That was Steven. So if you want to see a glowing review that breaks down things like the setting, the plot, characters, and stuff, that's someone who had a more positive experience with this. And it does have like a high rating on Goodreads, but I wonder how much of that is like fans of the books or fans of, you know, this author sort of thing. So I don't know. But that is this recent release roundup. I had to film it twice because I ran out of memory, which has not happened to me on my phone before, so my bad. And yeah, let me know if any of these are interesting to you. If you want to leave an emoji, leave a key, because we talked about Locklands near the end. Let me know any June releases that should have been on my radar that I missed, because I feel like I'm always missing releases. There's just like nothing to be done about it. There's just too many books. And yeah, that's it for this one. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.